Hey everybody, Aaron Rift here from NoDQ.com with some sad news to report. William Moody, aka Paul Bear, aka Percy Pringle, has died. He was 58 years old. WWE.com just announced it Tuesday evening. A big shock, although he was dealing with a lot of health problems for several years, and just recently he had canceled some wrestling bookings and some appearances, but um, it kind of came out of nowhere here. And he was on Twitter just a few days ago responding to people. And, Paul Bear was a huge star in the wrestling business, even though he wasn't an actual in ring performer. And, during the 80s, he was Percy Pringle. That's how he got his start managing throughout the 80s in various wrestling promotions. But most fans will remember him, of course, as Paul Bear. He came into the WWE in late 1990, early 1991. He actually wasn't part of the act with The Undertaker at first. When Undertaker debuted, Brother Love was his manager, and it was a few months later that WWE decided, you know what, Brother Love doesn't really fit with The Undertaker, and they brought in William Moody, Percy Pringle, to become Paul Bearer and be The Undertaker's manager, and him and Undertaker were a perfect match, and Paul Bearer would have this high-pitched voice and do most of the talking, and The Undertaker would stand there being menacing, and then The Undertaker would start talking with his deep, scary voice, and you had that dynamic right there between those two. And Paul Bearer would have the urn. The urn would play a huge role in a lot of WWE matches. With Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. And then, Undertaker eventually turned babyface, and Paul Bear continued to be the babyface manager for Undertaker for several years. I mean, they had a long run together from early 91 all the way up to SummerSlam 1996, when Paul Bear finally turned heel on The Undertaker and joined up with Mankind. That was the match between Undertaker and Mankind, the Boiler Room Brawl. So that was a significant moment in WWE history when, after all these years, Paul Bear had finally turned on Undertaker. And that would lead to another major feud in WWE. And that would be, of course, Undertaker versus Kane. And Paul Bear would reveal himself as the father of Kane, and that would lead to this whole storyline. At first, Paul Bear was blackmailing The Undertaker, telling the world that he had this secret about The Undertaker, and then he would eventually come clean with it, saying that Undertaker killed his parents, and there was this fire, and his brother was set on fire. Undertaker had a brother, but the brother survived, and of course that led to Kane making his debut with Paul Bear as the manager. And then, through 98, you had Undertaker and Kane with Paul Bear right there in the middle. Paul Bear would end up going back with Undertaker as a heel. Paul Bear and Undertaker would be a heel duo. And Undertaker formed the Ministry of Darkness, and Paul Bear was right there by his side. And then when Undertaker got hurt in late 99, Paul Bear went back to being with Kane, and he was a babyface once again, as a babyface manager for Kane. And after that, around 2000, Paul Bear would disappear for a while, but he returned in 2004 when The Undertaker made his big comeback with the whole dead man persona. Paul Bear returned for that, and for a brief time he was a manager with Undertaker, but by 2004, he was starting to have health issues. He between the WWE run in 2000 with Kane and when he came back with Undertaker, he was actually involved with TNA. And during the first year of TNA, when they were doing the weekly pay-per-views, and he had gained a lot of weight. If you watch his appearances in TNA in 2003, he was very obese and at a very dangerous weight. And he did drop some weight by the time he returned to WWE in 2004, but he was still having health issues, and his run only lasted a couple of months. He was that infamous angle at the Great American Bash where he was buried in the cement, the whole storyline with Undertaker and the Dudleys. and that was the end of Paul Bearer for several years. And then he would return in 2010 as the manager of the Undertaker, only to turn on Undertaker again and join up with Kane once again. But that would only last a few months. Paul Bearer once again having health issues. He couldn't commit to a full-time schedule with Kane, even making the television appearances. And they did the whole storyline where Edge was messing with Paul Bearer, and Kane ended up pushing Paul Bearer off a ledge when he was in the wheelchair. And that was the end of Paul Bearer. But then last year he actually did make one cameo appearance on Raw with Kane. And that was Paul Bearer's final WWE appearance. And Paul Bearer was still making occasional wrestling appearances, and he had an online presence. He was on Twitter, and it's just very sad. I mean, he was, like I said in the beginning, a very memorable WWE performer, even though he wasn't an actual in-ring performer. And I think a lot of casual fans, not just hardcore wrestling fans, will know who he is. He had a very unique look and the voice, and everybody always does the impressions of him. He was just a very memorable character, and from everything I've heard, he was a great human being. So it's very sad that he died, and just want to say rest in peace, William Moody, Paul Bearer. You will be missed.